So look, I don't think it's any secret that I'm not a fan of the Indiana Fever backroom staff. I'm not a fan of what they're trying to do to Caitlyn Clark.
We have officially reached that point.
The Indiana Fever don't want Caitlyn to be Caitlyn.
Why the double standard? Fire her. Damn. Fire her ass.
Those were the kind of questions media was asked.
Imagine this. The biggest star in the WNBA, Caitlyn Clark, known for her fire, passion, and game-changing energy, is physically grabbed by her own coach in the middle of a game. It's not just a sideline scuffle. It's a moment that sends shockwaves through the league, exposing months of behind-the-scenes tension and control tactics aimed at silencing the most electrifying player in women's basketball. The Indiana Fever thought they could suppress her energy, turn her into a controlled, marketable player, but what happened next was the breaking point. Fans are furious, analysts are speaking out, and Caitlyn Clark's silence is deafening. In this video, we're diving deep into what led to the coach's firing, the shocking aftermath, and why this moment could change the WNBA forever. Don't miss out. This isn't just about basketball, it's about the future of the game and the fight for athletes to be unapologetically themselves. The Indiana Fever recently found themselves at the center of a massive controversy following the shocking actions of one of their assistant coaches, who physically grabbed Caitlyn Clark during a June 2025 game. This incident, captured on video and shared across the internet, quickly went viral, sparking outrage and disbelief among fans, analysts, and media outlets. The altercation seemed to be a simple sideline scuffle at first, but as the details began to unfold, it became clear that this was more than just an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a months-long campaign by the Fever to suppress Caitlyn Clark's raw and emotional playing style. Clark, known for her fiery personality, electrifying on-court presence, and ability to engage the crowd, had become one of the most marketable and captivating players in the WNBA. But instead of embracing her unique identity, the Fever appeared determined to reshape her into a more subdued, polished, and controlled version of herself. The moment the coach grabbed her mid-hype, pulling her away from the crowd she had just fired up with a spectacular step-back three, was a breaking point that left a lasting impact on Clark. It was as if the team, instead of celebrating her passion and emotion, was trying to turn her into something she wasn't, an athlete who played on command, followed the system, and kept her emotions in check. This single act, when viewed in the context of the larger issues at play, seemed like an overt attempt to change Clark's identity and diminish the very qualities that had made her such a star. Following the incident, fans, former players, and analysts began to notice a dramatic shift in Clark's performance. What had once been an unstoppable, energetic player now seemed muted, robotic, and disconnected from the very energy that made her one of the league's most beloved stars. Her once relentless drive was no longer present, and her body language became that of a player going through the motions rather than a competitor feeding off the crowd's energy. It was as if the spark had been extinguished, and the change wasn't just visible to those watching from the stands. Her shot attempts dropped significantly, her minutes were inconsistent, and her impact on the game became less and less evident. While her stat line remained decent, there was an undeniable difference in her play, and the emotional edge that made her so captivating seemed to be gone. Fans who had previously been thrilled to watch her take over games with passion and fire were now seeing a much more subdued version of the player they had fallen in love with. This transformation didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of months of behind-the-scenes pressure. The Fever had, for a long time, been trying to turn Clark into a player who played within their system, someone who could be controlled and molded into a more marketable version of herself, one that fit the league's traditional image of what a professional athlete should be. The organization seemed less interested in celebrating Clark's natural gifts and more focused on controlling her every move. It wasn't just about her on-court performance, either. The Fever were making it clear that they wanted her to conform to their vision of what a star athlete should look like. Gone were the days of Clark embracing the chaos, hyping up the crowd, and playing with the emotion that had helped her rise to prominence. Instead, she was expected to remain calm, composed, and in control at all times, which was in direct contrast to the player that had made her so special. It became evident that the Fever saw Clark not as a dynamic force to be unleashed, but as a product to be molded, and the result was nothing short of heartbreaking for her fans. Even more concerning were the interactions Clark had with the referees during this time. In that same June game, when Clark was being grabbed by her coach, she was also subjected to rough play play from the opposition. She was poked in the eye and shoved to the ground without the benefit of a whistle or a call. The WNBA later admitted that the officials had lost control of the game and missed key calls, but, in typical fashion, there were no suspensions or accountability for the rough play Clark endured. This wasn't the first time she had faced this kind of treatment. Throughout the season, Clark had been on the receiving end of at least 5 flagrant fouls or technical fouls, many of which came from well-known enforcers in the league. Despite the physicality of these fouls, the league's response had been lukewarm at best. There was no significant penalty for the players responsible, and in some cases, referees even threatened to penalize Clark for simply hyping up the crowd, something that should have been encouraged, especially for a player who brought so much energy and excitement to the game. The message was clear. The league seemed to be actively trying to punish Clark for being herself. It became a glaring double standard. While male athletes like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, and even Angel Reese were celebrated for their emotional and fiery play, Caitlyn Clark was treated as a problem for doing the same. The league didn't know how to handle the most exciting player it had ever seen. The hypocrisy was staggering, and it only fueled the backlash. As the months passed, Clark's role within the Fever organization became more and more frustrating. The front office and coaching staff seemed determined to turn her into a version of herself that didn't align with her identity as a player. They wanted her to fit into their clean, polished version of what a professional should be, but Clark was never that player. She was raw, unfiltered, and full of fire, qualities that made her stand out, and it was clear that trying to suppress them was detrimental not only to her play but to the overall energy of the team. Fans and analysts alike began to see the pattern. Caitlyn Clark wasn't just a player with a unique skill set, she was a cultural phenomenon, a player whose passion and energy could carry an entire league. However, the Fever, in their attempts to control her, were doing the exact opposite. They were stifling her influence and, in turn, hurting the team. As the situation grew increasingly tense, the Fever's front office finally took action and fired the assistant coach who had grabbed Clark during that game. Officially, the organization cited a difference in direction, but it was clear that the real reason was the public outcry that followed the viral video. Fans demanded accountability, and the media didn't let the issue slide. The coach's actions were seen as a direct attack on Clark's identity, and in the end, the Fever had to address the situation, whether they wanted to or not. The firing wasn't just a reaction to one isolated incident, it was a recognition that the organization's treatment of Clark had reached a breaking point. However, it wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done. Caitlyn Clark had been forced to change who she was, to play in a way that wasn't authentic to herself. The bigger question now was whether the Fever would learn from this mistake and allow Clark to be the player she truly was, or would they continue to try and force her into a mold that didn't fit? Fans, media, and analysts were all watching closely to see if the Fever would support Clark moving forward or try to continue limiting her impact on the court. The pressure was on the front office. Would they embrace the passionate, unapologetic player who had already brought so much excitement and attention to the league, or would they continue trying to suppress her for the sake of a more controlled version of her? As the saga unfolded, it became clear that the WNBA needed to rethink how it approached its most powerful and dynamic players. The league could no longer afford to try and control stars like Caitlyn Clark. It needed to celebrate them for what they were: fiery, competitive, and unapologetically themselves. If the Fever and the WNBA as a whole were truly serious about growing the game and attracting more fans, they needed to allow players like Clark to play without the restraints of a system that sought to diminish their emotional connection to the game. The bottom line was clear: Caitlyn Clark was a force to be reckoned with, and any attempts to suppress her would ultimately backfire. The WNBA needed to let her, and others like her, be themselves if they wanted to see the league reach its true potential. With the coach now gone and the Fever facing mounting pressure from both the fans and the media, the question remained: would the organization finally allow Caitlyn Clark to return to the form that had made her one of the brightest stars in sports, or would they continue to try to manage her into a version of herself that didn't reflect her true spirit? Fans were watching closely, eager to see what the next chapter would bring.